morning, Turks and Caicos. Welcome to First Edition. We've got the pleasure today of sitting down for our final chat with none other than the Governor of the Turks and Caicos Islands, Her Excellency Dileeni Daniel-Selvaratnam. H.E., good morning. Thank you for coming.
Good morning, Cheryl. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, it's going to be awesome. Now, this is our end of year sit down, a moment to look back at the wins, the challenges, the defining moments, and yes, even the joys and rhythms of spending Christmas here in Turks and Caicos. So let's start by taking that wide panoramic look at the year that was. When you look back at 2025 HE, what do you consider the most defining accomplishments or milestones for the Turks and Caicos?
To be quite frank, I think the security really is our defining moment. I sent a message to Parliament this morning, and in that I was really reflecting that 2024 had really been quite a dark chapter, I think our highest murder rates ever, and also I just think across our islands there was just palpable fear and not knowing, and I think really what has defined this year is the sheer level of effort that has gone into really tackling security. I think sometimes it can feel like we're saying hollow messages. Oh, we're looking at this, we're investing in this, we're doing this. But actually, you need to see those outcomes. So I think there's been real effort behind that. I think we've really strengthened the leadership, particularly if you look at the Commissioner of Police, and that, you know, from a murder perspective, we're down by over 41% in terms of murders, and overall in terms of serious crime, we are down. So I think that is not an easy task, and I don't think people should underestimate the level of effort that has gone into that. But I think that for me would really be what has defined seeing that turning point come through from where we started the year. I don't know if you remember, but this time last year we had a cyber breach, we had the SpaceX explosion, we were in Perda with election fever, as well as incredibly high, both in terms of illegal migrants coming in and murder. So it was full on. So coming into sort of the same period this year, I am personally, but I think across the board and across the communities, we're breathing. And it doesn't mean that we're being complacent, but I really feel the effort has really reaped in terms of results.
And when you mention security, I think as islanders, as residents, we really see the difference, and we kind of felt more secure and safer. I know I did. It gave me that sense of calm. But you've been on the ground. You've been present on the ground a lot. What gives you encouragement to think that we're in the right direction?
I think, just as you said, Cheryl, I think because the community are feeling it, and it's all aspects of the community. When I'm out and about, they are, one thing, they're proactively coming up to me, which I also think is a demonstration of trust and confidence, and that's not something that you can take for granted at all. It's something you really have to earn, but it's very gratifying when they do, and for them to genuinely say that. But it is from all sectors and from all parts of our communities across our islands, and I think that's where I feel actually we are tracking. But also I think you're also getting more and more members of the community participating in what's going on. The police can't do justice on their own. And a lot of the communities know what's going on. They're at the heart of, they're hearing stuff, they're seeing. And for them to feel confident to come forward, that's huge. And so I think we're seeing a lot more of that, which has also helped our efforts. So it is definitely a collective success with the community as well, who have really come forward and played their part as well.
And we've seen the police HE start to build that collaboration and that network in the community. So, I mean, that's also been visible. Yes,
and I think, you can't police without the community. Community has to be at the heart of the policing response, and I think certainly with the Commissioner, that's definitely how he's sort of driven and structured his approach. And also, I think you've got to look at it from a nation-building perspective as well. So I think that has been key. And
HE, we're talking about wins and challenges. So what would you say was the most difficult decision you had to make in 2025, particularly in relation to public safety or constitutional obligations?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, to be honest, there's been a lot. It has been a lot of operational decisions on risk. And there have been a number of instances, particularly where you're looking at joint operations with partner agencies and regional and also the decisions where ultimately I feel very keenly the duty of care I have for our officers who are on the front line. And particularly where we have had that regional solidarity also with the Jamaican officers who come in, the officers from Barbados, with our own officers, the decisions around taking that on, those deployments against the risks that you're facing is significant, and there is a real duty of care that you face in terms of my own duties towards them and the protection of lives. And I always hold in high regard our officers, because I think their families, knowing what we're dealing with, don't know on a day-to-day basis when their loved one is putting on their uniform, what are they going to face that day? And so
or if they're coming back
or
home.
if they're coming back.
Yeah.
So for me, that always is the hard part, because we have to own it. We have to make those decisions. We have to support whatever the operational priorities are. And in many instances, we have no choice, because that is what's needed. But it's always that we've got to make sure that we're doing it in a way that protects their lives and manages risks.
Yeah. Now I'm going to put you on the defensive, Your Excellency.
Sure.
I know you'd never shy away from a question, but here's this one.
Okay.
There remains a perception that the United Kingdom steps in too late on issues where early support could prevent crises. Do you think the UK fully understands the pressures facing the TCI, and where has that relationship struggled this year?
That is a good question. No, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with you. I think the difficulty is our operational context is so very different to the UK model. And what I would say is, I don't think it's that the UK government doesn't want to support or doesn't want to help, but I think it's about how best in the model that it has can it effectively support us. So what I found both here, much more keenly here than in Anguilla, I think offers of support come in, but they're sort of initiative based, or they're sort of off the shelf of what can be offered. But actually, they're not grounded in what do we need, what are the threats we're facing, and also what's the bandwidth that we've got to implement that. So I think I've been very intentional, and I think there's been real support as well from the National Security Council and the Premier especially, where we've looked at it in the round and really felt we've got to go for what works for the Turks and Caicos Islands. So a lot of my time, and I think you would have seen, I've then also, with the support of the Premier, really worked on our regional partnerships, because I think they understand what we're dealing with. The model is also much more agile compared to the UK model. But we were at the Joint Ministerial Council, the Premier in London, a few weeks back. But I think the UK is also seeing that, and I think that they are really looking at how do their security responsibilities manifest operationally? What does it actually mean? And how does that manifest more than just having the governor here who's responsible for security? So there's a lot of work that we are doing both with the Ministry of Defence and the Home Office, and there's a lot, I think you see a lot of positives in the prism with the Ministry of Justice. But I think that's where, I think in terms of evolving the UK model, that's where the work has to be done. But I've always said, you know, my oath is to serve the interests of the Turks and Caicos Islands. I have got to make decisions and manage to threat. And I can't afford to wait for a model that's not as agile. I have to go to where I can get the resource and get the help.
If you're just joining us, this is First Edition, and we have the pleasure of sitting down with our governor for our end-of-year chat. Now, AT, public trust in institutions has been tested this year. Do you believe the governor's office has done enough to build confidence among the people? And what do you think still needs to change to encourage that trust?
I mean, I don't think I can be the judge of whether we've done enough. But I think I'm always open to the feedback of where people feel we could do more or what's not working. I think certainly not just, I really like to set my office up so it's not just about the governor, but every single person in my office is just as much aware that they're here to serve the interests of the Turks and Caicos Islands. I've been very intentional about really showcasing everything that we're doing, because I think sometimes people don't actually realise the range of what the governor deals with and where we're doing it. So I'm always trying to explain the processes, explain the decision making, and the outcomes of what we're doing, which hopefully will help support trust and confidence. But as I say, I have to be open to the feedback, and I'm always here to take on board where people think we could be doing better or we've dropped the ball, because it is always a work in progress and it's focused. And I think, for all of us, the bandwidth is so small in terms of the range of functions that we have to deal with. So it is a constant prioritisation in fielding to all of those different functions. But I'd always be open to feedback on that in terms of how I could better gain that trust and that confidence.
And as you talk about service and the variety of roles and tasks that you do, some days I watch you in the videos and I think, how does she do it? Like I've seen her at 6 different events for a day or something. It's just crazy.
Well, it's the nature of the job, and to everyone you fulfill a different role, and I don't feel I can let that person down. So you have to be very conscious of that in what you do, and I think that's service, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Now, you mentioned, HE, your attendance along with the Premier at the Joint Ministerial Council meeting in November, which is described as the primary forum for engagement between the UK and the overseas territories. Security and justice featured prominently at this year's Joint Ministerial Council. What practical outcomes or commitments from that meeting are most relevant to these islands?
So I think what's most relevant, I think, is the real focus of the discussions that the Premier and I had was really about what's the practical, tangible support, rather than the sort of there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of ideas, but actually how can we make that model more agile, as I said? I think one of the key areas was really also understanding and really getting the context of TCI in the context of Haiti. And if you look at where the sort of broader operations are with the US, with our partners, how do the UK equities in those operations then manifest, and actually looking at it from that much broader perspective. So I think the sort of greater engagement both from a Ministry of Defence and Home Office perspective was key. I think we're looking at some real practical support that will be coming in that we can announce shortly as well. But I think it's getting their engagement in our priorities and what we need, rather than a general sense of what can come in and out according to what might just work. So I think it's a work in action, but I think it felt that there was greater engagement in the practical substance of what's required.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you touched on it earlier, but for the benefit of our listeners and viewers, as governor, where do you feel the public misunderstands your role the most? And what would you like to clarify as we head into a new year?
I think I've said it I think what the main misconception is, I think a lot of people think I have a lot of unchecked powers.
You don't?
No, there really is. Yes, do I have powers to make decisions? Absolutely. But in the course of making the decisions, I try to be highly consultative. I'm required to be highly consultative. And also I have an accountability for my actions. So, and as I say, there are also constitutional safeguards for extreme actions. Have I used those? No. But I think that's the misconception. One, I think that I have all of these unchecked powers. And two, the governor can just get it to the governor, and the governor
solve
everything,
yes.
solve everything. But it's about partnership and working with people, and I certainly approach it from a collective sense of responsibility. Obviously, I will take ownership as I need to, but in all that I do, there really isn't anything that's unchecked in terms of my decision making.
So you're really not the Iron Lady?
I know, no, I'm sad to disappoint everyone. Maybe in other aspects.
Now, A.G., what was the moment this year when you felt your leadership was most tested? And how did you reconcile your constitutional duty with the realities on the ground?
I think I knew it would be an unpopular decision, but ultimately I had to follow the law. I did sort of go back and forth through chambers just to I really wanted to understand what's the process. I really wanted to understand the judgment and really understand what was the role of the Status Commission, what role did they now have in putting those documents to me, and understanding that it was more a sort of administrative role for me to then make the decision making, understanding the criteria or how it needed to play. So there was a lot of work that went into just really legally understanding it. And then once I'd sort of made the decision, I really wanted to be clear in explaining that. As I said, I'll always take ownership of the decisions I need to take. And I think there's some leaders who always like to protect their legacy or shy away from the controversial decisions or kick it into the long grass. I just think you've just got to rip the Band-Aid off. You've got to make the decision. And actually, for the individuals themselves, it's a reflection on how we deal with issues, not only for them but others. And I think there's got to be a sort of humanity in respect of bringing a timely conclusion to matters that need decision making on them. But it was testing, and I think afterwards it was testing because I can understand where the concerns were coming from, but at the same time I had a role to play.
Yes.
And the law was very, very clear in that. I think it would have been harder, had it been more of a subjective decision, to be quite frank. And I would have had to really think about how do I get then the different sort of thoughts and perspectives for a more subjective decision. But because it was actually fairly objective, in many ways, it from a leadership perspective, I think that helped that I could, and then I think it's easier to explain. But yes, of course, it was quite the moment. I think I can understand that. I think citizenship is a very complex issue, and I think identity politics comes to the fore in many different ways. So you can understand why it was such a touch point for people, and then wanting to know what does this then mean for the Turks and Caicos Islands. So I was very aware of all of that, and I was very conscious of all of that. But ultimately, I had a job to do, and I have to take ownership of that.
Thank you for that, A.G. I'm glad you mentioned the word humanity, because I'm going to shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Because beyond the office and the constitutional frameworks, there's the person, the human being living and working among us. You've now spent another full year in the Turks and Caicos Islands. What experiences or interactions have shaped your personal connection to these islands?
I to be honest, I do love being out and about with the community. And
it shows.
I have to say, I hadn't quite realised the energy of our seniors I was... You say I have energy, but meet the seniors of Grand Turk.
Yep, I saw them.
On a different level. But I think, to me, that's what makes me feel part of the community. The fact that people will embrace me, will I recognise people, we have our own connections, and just being able to understand what they're dealing with and being out and about amongst them. The farmers market I went to a few weeks back, it's just that's what I cherish, really, the day-to-day interactions, not the sort of big formal, obviously the formal events or a part of it, but for me it is just wandering down as an average citizen to get my vegetables at the farmer's market, or being with that's the thing that brings me joy and makes me feel that I'm a part of the community and home.
So what would you say that you've learned about the culture, the people, the daily life that you didn't fully grasp when you came?
I think one of the things is just how interconnected everyone is, and the proximity of decision making to community or family outcomes. I hadn't quite appreciated that. That said, I think there's a real strength in that, and you really see the strength of the community through that. And also, I think the other thing is just how different each of the islands are. They all have their own personalities. They have very different challenges, very different sort of highlights and positives. And I think really not approaching it from a one-size-fits-all, but really thinking about, okay, well, what will this mean for North Caicos, and actually, hold on, how will the access work for that sort of thing. I think that's been something that I'm very conscious of in terms of my decision making and approach.
So you look at the islands almost individually.
Yeah. You have to. Yeah. You really do. I mean, yes, there is a collective there, and yes, we need to, but the security response for what we need to do in Providenciales is very different to Grand Turk, is very different to South Caicos and North and Middle. It doesn't mean any one is more important than the other, but it has to be tailored to the differences of how those communities and those islands are.
Yeah. And Governor, since this is season, we have to touch the heart. Christmas in Paradise.
Yes.
But before we get into lighter chatter...
Sure, I thought you'd say Christmas in Grand Turk. I'll take Paradise.
Well, Paradise for me
yes,
means Grand Turk.
Exactly.
But before we get into the lighter chatter, let's talk a bit about Operation Shepherd, a seasonal policing operation. With the festive season bringing increased public events, movements across the islands, what indicators will you be using to determine whether Operation Shepherd is effectively achieving its prevention and deterrence?
I think it's probably by the level of calm that we can achieve across each of the islands. So I think it's something that we take very seriously. Operation Shepherd worked very well last year in terms of our efforts, and I think we've gone from strength to strength in terms of those multi-agency efforts between the police, regiment, border force and others. And I think now, going back to that sort of community approach, I think the sort of tangible sort of outcomes you'll see, it'll be more community focused in and amongst the community rather than that sort of... Last year it was very much, you'd see the guns and there will be a heightened visible presence in certain areas. We will have vehicle checkpoints as needed. But I think it will be coming from a sort of community approach of policing. The harder, sort of more sophisticated tactical operations will be there, obviously, but it is coming at it from, we recognise this as the festive season, we want the reassurance of safety for everyone, but also we want to make sure that we are protecting our islands across the piece.
Yeah, and you mentioned community often when we talk about policing, and we're seeing that. We saw the commissioner and his officers and ranks at the maternity ward at the hospital.
Oh, okay,
we
lovely.
saw them out at the seniors' home giving gifts and just bringing cheer, and that's something we haven't seen our police do in a while, and so it again reassures us that we're moving in the right direction.
I think we have to. I think it is an implicit part of how we operate. I couldn't do my job if I wasn't in and amongst the community and understanding what's going on. The police certainly can't in respect of that. But also we are members of the community as well, so it would be odd to be at a distance or aloof from that.
Since we're on the subject of security, the Turks and Caicos Islands is set to host the 2026 Northern Caribbean Security Summit Principals Meeting. What strategic significance does this hold for the territory in shaping regional responses to organized crime and maritime threats?
It's a really critical forum. So it's primarily it's the Turks and Caicos Islands with the Bahamas and the US. So that actually is that sort of triumvirate is a really key security relationship for us in respect of our sort of maritime security and then broader operations. This year also we're going to be inviting representatives from Jamaica and the Cayman Islands and also really looking at it in terms of the sort of strategic picture in Haiti, how that is evolving, what that needs, and how best that we work together in respect of that. I mean, I think I've spoken to you previously about my focus has been developing the national security architecture. And as part of that, we need to be having that greater sense of the regional threat landscape and how we and what's coming ahead. As much as we've been in the now, what's coming ahead, how is it evolving? And this security conference is really a strategic conference that's looking at that longer term investment, that longer and that wider regional security landscape, and how we then are an equal partner within that. The UK will also be there as part of the TCI delegation, and I think again it's part of our efforts of really working with our UK partners to get their buy-in and also their sort of operational engagement as part of these key operations, and also seeing it from a wider perspective for them as well, particularly where you have independent Caribbean and the US and Canada also playing such a key role in helping our wider security.
Yeah. Now, I know you've said thank you so many times. I've seen you at press conferences saying thanks, but what's your message now that we're at the end of the year to our security partners?
I'm just really grateful, to be honest, and I think thank you can seem quite simple, but I think it's just really having the sheer respect for what they do, for also the tenacity, the committed efforts, but ultimately they put themselves in harm's way for us, all of them, whether they are from the Turks and Caicos Islands, from Jamaica, wherever they are from, they are working to keep us safe and putting themselves at risk to keep us safe. And so they really do have my utmost respect and gratitude.
Yeah. Now on to more jovial comments.
Okay.
How are you finding the Christmas season in the TCI, and what traditions or community events have stood out to you? I know you mentioned the Senior Citizens Party in Grand Turk already.
Well, and also this year I went to the Christmas Bazaar. That was great. I mean, Grand Turk seems to do, like, I really felt the Christmas spirit in Grand Turk when I went.
Do?
Yeah, it was huge. But I don't know. I feel Christmas has been coming in from sort of right from the 1st of December. I think the Christmas spirit has been among us, hasn't it? And carols have been sung. But I think the Christmas Bazaar was certainly quite a highlight, and then obviously the seniors and the sing along. I don't think you can get it. You can't get anything better than that. And it was lovely because I had a whole load of prison superintendents here for a conference, and they sort of very happily serenaded all the sit-ins. So that it was a wonderful afternoon, I have to say.
So, Governor, do you have any personal Christmas traditions that you've blended into your life here, or perhaps any new ones you've picked up?
So my parents are sort of signed up Turks and Caicos Islands spending Christmas here. And they come out and about with me as well. I mean, they're just as much as sort of happy to come along and meet with the community and have their own little people and friendships that they've got. So, no, I mean, Christmas for us in Shropshire, we obviously have the different traditions of what we cook and do with each other. But really for us, it's just spending time with each other. Taking time, if I can, to just have a bit of a pause and reflect. But we'll be out on the 26th. No doubt my parents will be taking me about in doing anything. But we just want to enjoy the islands and Christmas with everyone here.
Yeah. How would you describe a TCI Christmas in one phrase or one sentence?
I think you go all out.
Yeah. Particularly Grand Turk.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet, but I hope to go. I hear it's quite pretty, lights everywhere.
So pretty. It was just Christmas was sprinkled everywhere.
Great. From the festive atmosphere back to the heart of public service, the people. You've spent significant time engaging with communities on the Family Islands. What have you learned from those interactions this year?
I think one, the level of resilience they have, and I think, particularly I remember the Premier and I, after we had the hurricane before Melissa. Do you remember? It's just gone out of my mind.
No.
And I think Salt Key and Grand Turk especially, where all the sargassum came up.
Yes.
So the Premier and I were then visiting the next day, and we went to Salt Key, and just the sheer sort of, that community, they are also every function of a community, aren't they? So yes, they are, residents there, but they, their civic spirit and strength of resilience and dependency on each other, I think, is incredibly impressive. And I don't think we can take it for granted. You see that also in North and Middle Caicos as well. And I think we really do need to acknowledge the level of civic duties they take on without probably even thinking it's a civic duty. So I think that's important to acknowledge, but also from our perspective, the infrastructure and the support that needs to go hand in hand with that. And for South Caicos, I think it's evolving so much with the investment with the direct flights. I think that was this year as well. The direct flights coming, and that you're forgetting all the. I keep forgetting all the different things that have happened. So that's bringing its own challenges, but for me it's the resilience and the spirit of civic duty across the Family Islands that I really admire.
Your Excellency, let's turn the page a bit. This year has been a year where many citizens have voiced concerns about the cost of living, health care, and access to service. What message do you want to send to those individuals who feel unheard?
I can understand why they feel unheard, because I think ultimately they are living day to day in their worry and their concern, and I think we can seem very remote in respect of that. And as much as there is action going on, there is work to look at how can we sort of reduce those costs or help manage that. The press statements, it's going to be very, very remote. People just want to see, the cost of my food basket. How does that operate? Or paycheck to paycheck. It's very, very difficult. I can quite see that. I think that's why the sort of community engagement is key, and getting out and about and understanding that and those different relationships. I think there's a lot being done now, I think, with social development, where they've sort of separated out I think the sort of focus on childcare in one aspect, and then the wider, so that they can get that sort of more direct focus in supporting people. We're also doing a lot with the churches. I think there was the prayer breakfast that Minister Malcolm took forward, and that really was, what does faith in action actually mean, and how are you turning up in the everyday struggles of people as part of that. So I think there is definitely more to be done. I think it's very hard in respect of how you get that reach. But I think the onus is on us in terms of our outreach, in terms of signposting where there can be support, and really listening to understand what those struggles are. Yeah,
and I think we've heard criticism like, oh, it isn't that bad, or I'm making it. But I think for those families and those individuals who have these economic challenges, it becomes very personal.
It is very personal, but also they're very vulnerable. I think, one of the things that the Premier and I were actually talking about with the Financial Services Commission last week was, as much as they're sort of like looking at the sort of prudential side of banking and lending services, actually how are we focusing more from a consumer protection side, because these people are very vulnerable. Micro lenders are can in some ways take advantage. And then I was explaining to someone the other day, and I said, well, people are living paycheck to paycheck, which they can just about manage, but then the fridge breaks down, so then they'll take a loan to pay for the fridge. But if they don't understand the loan agreement, they're then paying how many times more, and then spiraling completely and taking advantage of. So I think one of the areas that I'm quite keen to focus on as is the Premier with the FSC is how can we look at that sort of aspect of it, and how can we also help support sort of financial literacy, money, just money matters and money literacy, and support and avenues for that. But there's great vulnerability in that, and I it's a struggle. I think there is a real struggle, and I don't think we can underestimate it.
I think that's a great segue, and maybe that's already one of your priorities. But what would you say are your top 3 priorities going into 2026?
So top three definitely is looking at the wider criminal justice system. I think from a law enforcement perspective, the agencies have been doing an excellent job, and particularly on the policing side in terms of the apprehension of sort of very key nominals. The rest of the justice system now needs to then be robust to deliver on those justice outcomes. Otherwise, the efforts really are sort of worthless in a way. So really focusing on the wider criminal justice system, efficiency and effectiveness, and ensuring that, bail works as it needs to work, in providing the safeties, efficiency in getting the cases heard, not re-traumatising victims and witnesses, and then how that then works to sort of the prisons and then the probation and rehabilitation side. So that sort of holistic reform is a real key priority for me. Related to that is really the prevent side, but particularly our youth, at-risk youth, particularly at-risk boys, and how we can strengthen the sort of support structures and systems around that. I think the Department of Rehabilitation is doing a great job. They're going to be launching a new initiative in January, which is really underpinning the multi-agency sort of wraparound that we need to give to at-risk children. So there'll be more to come on that, but that will be a key priority. And then I think sort of on that wider note, working to look at, from my office and responsibilities, how can I support that wider picture of vulnerability and what sort of initiatives that we can put in place, like the one that I was talking about with the FSC.
Mm-hmm. And mentioning the justice system, I hosted the Human Rights Commission's conference, their panel last
on Human Rights Day, yes.
And King's Counsel Oliver Smith was a panelist, and Justice Solution was there, and they both mentioned this backlog of cases, and Casey Smith was saying it's somewhat of a disadvantage to those charged because they have the right to a speedy hearing, and so they're saying, what are we doing about that backlog?
So, this is part of the work that I really want to focus on. So the Chief Justice chairs the Criminal Justice Working Group, and that really is to look at what are the dependencies on each agency, because I think sometimes everyone prioritises what's within their lane, but they're not actually looking at the whole system and the dependencies, and also what that means. I mean, it has a particular impact on our prison system, where you then have a significant proportion on remand, so you can't begin to start doing proper interventions with them because they've obviously not necessarily been convicted at this stage. But there's a lot we're doing, both in terms of, everyone will say, we need more sort of space, or we need more I mean, you do need more courts. We do need to look at the infrastructure, but I think we also need to look at efficiency, basic efficiency. I think we also need to look at just the sort of trial management. Sometimes I hear there's a lot of delays, which might just help from a defence perspective or not. So I think it's really looking at what's the urban myths. Is that true? Yeah. Is there a lot of gamesmanship going on, or is that not the case? What is the root cause of these delays, and how can we unpick them? So that's going to be the key focus, really, with the Criminal Justice Working Group.
Great. Now, where do you believe the TCI is headed over the next year, economically, socially, and in terms of national stability? Where are we headed?
I think we are at a bit of a tipping point, really. I think there's a lot of progress being made, and I think my concern really has been from a security front, because the security will affect the economy. Right. And so in terms of sort of projections for next year, if we keep going where we're going from a security perspective, I think that drives stability. It gives the space for economic growth, and helps in terms of that wider positioning. So I think it's not something we can be complacent about, but I think the more that we can drive the progress that we've made, look at the wider structural reforms that we want to take forward with the police, and really get that talent pipeline, and look at the prevent agenda and the wider social development and infrastructure that's needed. Because I always say, once it gets to the police, it's too late. And what we need to do is really look uphill at what, even with all the development coming in, what's the social infrastructure that requires? What does that mean from a social, from I don't know, hospital beds, schools, social services? What does that mean in terms of different populations? So I think there needs to be that focus rather than that feeling that it's getting more and more squeezed to help that wider stability.
So, Governor, if there was one change or one visible improvement that you'd like the people to feel or see this time next year, what would that be?
I think I would really like to see obviously we've talked a lot about security, but I just think from a customer service and understanding public service perspective, I think I'd like people to feel confident that they understand when they put an application in, how it's tracked and what the outcome is. I think that alone, and even if you look at it from an ease of doing business, it's a sort of reputational aspect as well, not only internally for our own communities, but also for visitors and external people alike. So for me, really driving that and working with the public service in the different areas where they are sort of quite big, I think would be probably the single most change that I think would drive the most value and confidence.
So, AG, what goals, professional or otherwise, have you set for yourself for 2026?
I haven't had chance to even think what my goals would be. But I really, for me, I want to really consolidate where we are on the security front, really supporting the Commissioner of Police in driving the sort of reforms within his police force, work with the Integrity Commission to get that done and get the reforms done there. So for me, next year I really want to be a year of consolidating the change. I think we've made great strides, but we've been since I started, we've been in a very reactive mode. We've had to be. We really have had to be. So for me, I think my goal is really to be in that more strategic and consolidating space and really making sure all the sort of hygiene and foundational planks are in order from which we can build great reform.
So, Governor, we've noticed in comparison to your predecessors, you seem to be having quite a few regional appointments. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps, I think it is true, but I think for me, I obviously look at it in terms of competence, but also understanding of the context. We talked earlier about really understanding the operational context of the Turks and Caicos Islands, but also as sort of, I also want people who have an interest and a vested interest in the Turks and Caicos Islands. So I think with the Commissioner of Police, I really wanted to find someone who sheer competence and leadership at really strong levels of sort of fortitude of leadership, but also he fully understand the nature of the crime that we were dealing with and the multifaceted nature of it, and much more of a fit, I think, in terms of what our needs were. Similarly, I think with the Judicial Services Commission, again, obviously previous members all very diligent, but I felt that I wanted members who'd worked in the jurisdiction as judges. So Justice Adderley, obviously, his reputation precedes them, and obviously Justice Carlos Simons, who have added their own. So Janice Pereira, who was there as an existing member, but also sits now on the UK Privy Council. So I think we have a really strong JSC, but also who understand TCI, have that vested interest in terms of their involvement, and they came earlier this year for a trip and met, amongst others, obviously with the judiciary and extending their duty of care, but also met with the Premier as a courtesy call and others, which I think is important when you're serving a country to understand the sort of wider context and what those interests are. Similarly with the chair of the Integrity Commission, it had to be a judge, within this sort of constitution, but with Bernard Turner, he's served here before, he's from the Bahamas, and again provides that sort of understanding of our context here. So that's really what drives competence, is definitely the sort of starting point, and then really understanding the operating context, the dynamics, and the vested interest in serving our islands.
Yeah. You've also made a regional appointment to the FSC.
Yeah, so with FSC we had, yes, I have the Rigby brothers, both of them separately appointed, and they're really interesting, actually. To be honest, I mean, real credit to them, because they both, from TCI, live and work in London, doing great stuff in the city there, want to serve their country. So sitting on, but also bringing that perspective, that sort of corporate perspective that they're getting from the city, and bring it back. And I think the more that we can encourage that from the diaspora, the better, because I think we have to feel to every function here. We don't necessarily have all of the different experiences, and sometimes I think it is a struggle, and we sometimes compromise perhaps on quality or outlook because you feel you've got quite a sort of defined pool. But I think there is a rich community out in the diaspora, real talent there, and I think people who are willing to serve. So I think that's a really good example of people really bringing back their talents and investing in others here.
And that's commendable. And I'm glad you mentioned that, AG, because the diaspora seem to think that we don't want them, or we don't want them to come back. So that's commendable when we have people coming back home to serve and give of their time and talent.
Yeah, there's a real opportunity, and I think maybe we could do more of advertising these opportunities as well. Obviously we want to try and recruit from within the Turks and Caicos Islands, and but sometimes there are really specialist areas, and the depth of that experience may not be here, but it doesn't mean it's not within the diaspora. And I think we'd be keen to make those bridges, and the Rigby brothers are really a really good example of that.
And while we're talking about the UK and the diaspora, what about the Chevening scholars?
Oh, they're doing great. I mean, I think I saw one of them who's recent. I can't remember which job she's now got, but she's recently got a great job. We had a wonderful event with some of the alumni, and they too, I think, are really keen. Well, one of the things I was talking to them about was networking and opportunities for networking. And when we're talking about the Prevent agenda, it is also in that, how are we working with our sort of young talent? How are we giving them exposure to different experiences, and how are they also networking with each other and drawing on each other's talents? So I think we have a really energetic Chevening's alumni here in TCI, but the two that we've got out at the moment doing great. So I look forward to catching up with them when they're next back here. But honestly, it's really good to see. Part of the Chevening Scholar is about what they're tested on is not just I want to do a master's, but how do you envisage driving value when you return home? And what are your objectives? And you really see the sort of national pride and spirit. So they're quite, it's quite admirable in terms of what they're doing.
You know what struck me about the Chevening, and I'm not sexist, I'm feminist.
Yes.
There seem to be a lot of ladies, a lot of females.
There are. And to be honest, we were doing a drive to try and get more male applicants. But I think, again, going to that sort of wide, when I talked about at-risk boys, I think in many ways, for whatever reason, girls are very good at navigating to these opportunities in a way that I don't think we're getting the boys. And I think we have to look at how we reach them and resonate with them more so to then guide them to these opportunities and pathways to success.
Yeah. And Governor, you also have a number of vacancies out in the region for the executive of the Royal Turks and Caicos Islands Police Force. Why do you think that was necessary? And are you expecting any sort of backlash from, why isn't it a Turks and Caicos Islander?
I mean, well, the competition's still open, so it could be a Turks and Caicos Islander. But no, I mean, we talked about policing here. We need to look at the model, and then I don't think there's anyone who would disagree in terms of saying that there needs to be reforms within the police force. And so I think for the Commissioner, his sort of first few months, because we swore him in this year as well. I think that was a milestone for this year. I think has just been sort of catching his breath, dealing with the sort of reactive strides of it. So these posts are very much part of that sort of trying to put it on a stable and an outlook footing, and also lifting standards. So Deputy Commissioner of Police, obviously, an additional Deputy Commissioner of Police, an Inspector General, which is really looking at standards within the policing force, looking at complaints, looking at conduct, which I think has to go hand in hand. A Chief Operating Officer, just in terms of the overall management and running of the police force, because I think the the Commissioner of Police needs the sort of strategic space to be able to drive operations and policing and the regime, but you need someone at a sufficiently senior level who's doing the running of a significant organisation. So they're key posts that are really about starting there to look at how do we really make the Royal Turks and Caicos Islands Police Force a force for the future, not one that's sort of continually adapting from its sort of original model into something which has been quite reactive. So I think they're key posts. I'm really looking forward to who may apply and getting them in, but really helping support the drive for our services and maturing the model.
Yeah. Any thoughts about changing it from force to service? I think Bermuda has service.
Yeah, I think it's not something, I'd be honest, that the Commissioner and I have discussed yet, but I think that's definitely across the board. It tends to be where people are UK has, Bermuda has, I think Cayman has as well, haven't they? Yeah, so it's definitely, I think it goes back to that community policing.
Force sounds so militant,
It
and service sounds like they are just there to serve.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think at the Police Welfare Association had the OT conference here, or the regional conference, I should say. And there he was saying, you know, when policing started, it was that very Bigfoot policing and force is very representative. We've moved way beyond that, haven't we? So I definitely think it's something as part of the wider reforms that we need to look at.
Yeah. And this year, talking about policing, you also renamed the police headquarters.
Oh, we did, yes. Yeah, I think it's really important that we celebrate our history in the present. So that was it was a really nice moment in terms of recognition for Mr. Grant.
Now, while I know you're out and about and you're always in some community event or activity, I don't think I've ever seen you dunk a ball or, play cricket. But I understand you like sports.
I love sport. I'm perhaps more a spectator.
You're usually the cheerleading section.
That I am a participant. But I was away this weekend, but I really enjoyed watching. I wished I could have seen the women's football who are out this weekend, because they're doing great guns on that front. But no, I always love a match, always love some form of sport. But yeah, we have a good lot of talent across our islands. Yeah. It's really, really impressive in respect to what we're doing. And I think it's early in the new year. Is it February or March, or maybe a bit later? It's the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. So that's going to be a really exciting time for us going in there. And I look forward to meeting our athletes in Glasgow.
H.E., every time I see a picture or a video of you, children seem to gravitate towards you. Why is that?
Well, it's that they are key members of the community too, and they are our sort of talent pipeline for the future. And I serve everyone, but it is a joy. It's an absolute joy, and that's where, when you've had a hard day, and you just see the innocence and their hope and joy, it melts away everything that's tough, but also it really underlines the purpose of what we're trying to drive to and achieve. So it's always wonderful to be amongst them.
So before we wrap, here's a quick round of rapid-fire questions, just for fun.
Okay.
Favorite food, TCI?
Oh, favorite food? Oh, okra and rice.
Really?
I love okra and rice.
Most memorable place you visited in the islands?
Oh, I think Mujin Harbour. I always love. Or the caves. The caves are always wonderful.
Favorite local phrase you've grown fond of?
I don't know. What's my favourite local phrase? I soon reach, probably.
A song that sums up your whole year.
Song that sums... Oh, well, last week I thoroughly enjoyed singing Mama Baked Me Some Johnny Cakes. So
really?
Yes! That's always a good pride piece, but that was wonderful, yeah.
And what's your Christmas wish for the Turks and Caicos Islands?
I really want, from where we were last year, my Christmas wish is a Christmas where it's peaceful and people genuinely feel calm and safe to enjoy themselves and take that time with their family.
Yeah. Let me just quickly go through kind of your year in review. In February, you had general elections. You oversaw the 2025 Turks and Caicos general elections in your constitutional role, and the Progressive National Party secured a strong majority. Also in February, you swore in the third MISIC administration as Premier, formalizing the new cabinet configuration post-election. In May, you had the Trade Winds 25 security exercise, where you publicly commended TCI law enforcement and the TCI regiment for regional participation. And also in May, you had the policing reform call, where you advocated for data-driven, community-led policing as part of crime strategy and reform. In June, you had the Islander status grants and backlash, as they say. August to October, you addressed challenges with digital misinformation and impersonation scams, demonstrating modern communication vulnerabilities. And December, for this part of December, community and anti-corruption focus, where you hosted and championed community events such as the annual Christmas sing-along for seniors and delivered an International Anti-Corruption Day message addressing ethical leadership and youth engagement. That was kind of a quick look at your year in review.
Yes.
Do you remember all of that?
No. No.
So, Governor, we'd like to thank you so very much for sitting down with
you.
us. It has been awesome, as always. We want to wish you and your parents and the rest of the family a very happy Christmas. We hope you have fun amongst us and continue to just be that great governor that you are.
Thank you, Cheryl. I wish you and your family a wonderful Christmas, and to everyone who's watching and tuning in, I really hope you have a wonderful and blessed Christmas with your family and loved ones.
This has been First Edition with our end-of-year sit-down with Her Excellency the Governor, Dileeni Daniel-Selvaratnam. We'll see you next year.
The Nation Station, RTC.